What do you wonder? Ha.
That's a good question.
I wonder a lot about the future.
I wonder if I am choosing the right pathway in terms of how I'm living my life.
I wonder a lot of stuff, like what's out in the universe.
With the question, what do you wonder? I mean, we could go really, really deep into this.
I wonder how long I'm gonna have on this earth and if I'll accomplish my purpose.
I wonder why people complain all the time.
I wonder where I'm gonna be at in the next 5 to 10 years.
We both wonder, I think, if there's ever going to be grandchildren coming along.
I wonder if my kids are going to have a good life.
I wonder how we got here.
What do we wonder about him? I wonder when he's going to start to lose some weight.
Yeah, I wonder.
So one of the things I really wonder, and I don't know what you really wonder about, one of the things I really wonder is, will we ever get the temperature right in any room we ever meet in? Because it's either blazing hot or freezing cold, and we can never seem to get it just right. And I wish I brought a parka today. So anyways, there's, I don't know what you wonder. One of the things that I wonder, though, is why it's so difficult to do the healthy thing when you know kind of what's good for you and what's not good for you, and why it's so difficult to make, the wise choice sometimes when you know what's right to do, but you just can't seem to get there. You just can't seem to pull the trigger on the wise choice, whatever that is. Those are some of the things I wonder. And I know that those of us who believe in God, and I think that's most of us, but I think that, just in case, I'm not going to assume that, but those of us who believe in God, we wonder why it is that sometimes certain people are healed from sickness and certain people aren't, right? You wonder that sort of thing. You're like, how could that happen, and why would that seem to happen? And also, we kind of wonder about afterlife and what does heaven look like and all those sorts of things. And for me, will my mom to me look like the younger version of my mom or the older version of my mom, or how does that all work together? Or you may be thinking, will this pet be there, and will this pet be? I mean, we have these thoughts, right? And these things that we just wonder about. And so wonder is a gift that God has given us. And though we're concluding this series, Welcome to Wonderland, we will continue with that idea of wonder next week. That's why it says wonder on your little invitation. So anyway, the wonder of Christmas is an amazing thing as well. We all wonder, and we've been saying this, we wonder through a window, through a understanding of the world, through a lens. We wonder through something. We know that our lens is limited, our window, our view is limited of everything. We all know that we are wrong about certain things. We just don't know what those certain things are, right? And if you think, well, I'm not wrong about anything, of course you think that. That's why you think the way you think, is because you know you're right. Anybody ever I just know I'm right. I just know I'm right, right? You have a logical argument with someone, but you're like, nah, I know I'm right. That's me all the time. So I know that I have this window, right, that I view the world through, but I also know that I've got some things wrong. I just don't know what those are. And I think some of us, we all know that we have some things wrong about God. We just don't know what they are. But there are some essential things that we know just are right. Good. I got some sound effects with that. I like that. So we all wonder through a window or a frame, but we also know that we wonder because our frame of reference doesn't provide us with all the answers that we seek. The window through which we see the world doesn't provide us with all the answers of all the questions that we seek. We know that there are questions that our frame of reference does not answer, cannot answer, because it's a limited view of the world. So there are things beyond our understanding. There are things outside of our scope of understanding. But what we do know What we do know is that God became one of us to clarify things for us. So God became one of us to clarify things for us. We've been talking about how God came to our side of the window frame so that we could know where we stand with him. He stood with us on our side of the window frame so that we could know where we stand with him. And he clarifies a lot of things for us and clears up a lot of things. Because if we didn't have Jesus, all we would have was this pre-existing stories and these pre-existing texts, the ancient Jewish texts, right? And we would still have a ton of questions, but Jesus comes and clarifies a ton of things up for us. We've been actually following along in Hebrews 12, and we've been saying that the writer of Hebrews was originally talking to some Jewish converts to Christianity who were finding freedom in Christ, and then they were being pulled back into some old customs which were kind of limiting them. They were being pulled back into an old covenant that Jesus had fulfilled and replaced. And so they were finding themselves kind of taking steps backward into a more legalistic way of living. And the writer of Hebrews is encouraging them, and he says this in Hebrews 12, verse 2. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. That is, the pioneer meaning the originator, the first, the one who started our faith, and the perfecter meaning the last, like he's the perfect example of our faith. So he makes this argument that we should fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, and not get distracted by all the other things that seem to distract and destroy our faith. So today is going to be an interesting thing because we're going to talk about faith. But before we get there, last week we ended on this question. Because many of us have found that we either left our faith or we're thinking about leaving our faith, or we know someone who's left their faith. And so I want to ask this question for those of us who maybe have at one point left our faith or thinking about losing our faith or leaving our faith. I want to ask you this question. What was or what is the faith you lost fixed on or fastened to? And the question, if it's not Jesus himself, then the faith that you're losing or the faith that you've lost is not the faith that matters anyways, because the faith that matters is attached to Jesus himself, not other things. Right? Does it make sense? So fixing our eyes on Jesus is very, very important. And today, and I know as we approach Christmas, right, it's kind of a refocus on Christ's birth. It's a refocus on God becoming flesh. There's a refocus on him coming and shining a light in our dark world. But I want to invite you to fix your eyes on Jesus again, not on like church in general, not on like Christians or current events or the Bible or things that'll let you down, but fix your eyes on Jesus himself. On Jesus himself. And there's one kind of common objection or obstacle that you might have when we talk about this sort of thing, and that is that sometimes we think that the assumption is that Christianity requires mind-numbing, experience-denying faith. Meaning, you say, okay, I know these things to be true about science, you just want me to throw them out. Or I know these things have happened to me, but now you're telling me I have to ignore those things and just believe. And I've got to ignore the thing that happened to me that cut me and hurt me so deeply. And I have to ignore the thing that happened to my sister or my brother or my parents or my kids and just believe based on what? Just faith in faith itself? And I mean, I've had this conversation with many, many people. And that is not the original version of our faith. That is not the original. The original version is not just to have faith in faith or faith because of faith. In fact, faith didn't create what we believe. There's something more behind it. See, in the original version, nobody followed Jesus because of faith's sake. They followed Jesus because they saw him do things. They heard him say things. They saw him come through with things, and ultimately he would rise from the dead. So that ultimately is what launched our faith. So it's not this like, we think this happened and maybe he can do this. It's not like that. And people didn't follow Jesus because of something they believed. In spite of what they saw and experienced, they followed him because they saw him do stuff and they heard him do stuff, and ultimately he rose from the dead. So today it's about faith. Today we're talking about faith. And first of all, let's kind of define a couple things faith is not. Faith is not a force or power. Okay, and that's kind of what it's been taught to us, and many of us, and if we grew up in church, we grew up thinking that faith was a force or a power that you just tap into and you just sort of figure out, and if you get the right stuff, then you know everything's going to work out for you, and if you kind of understand it. And pastors have made faith complicated and confusing and have caused many people to wander from faith because of the way that we've described it. Okay? So this has been a big issue because we have not defined it correctly. So faith is not a force or a power, because if it was something that we could just kind of tap into, it would just be magic. It would just be magic. And it's not magic. The second thing that faith is not is it's not a formula. It's not like a PIN number that you, as soon as you have the right numbers, you can just press those and things will happen for you, right? And well-meaning people have kind of taught us this sort of stuff accidentally, without thinking of the ramifications of that. If you do this, God will do this. That's just sort of trying to control what God will do, and we don't have any control of what God will do. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. In fact, in Hebrews, we're going to continue a little bit. We're going to jump a little bit back. We're going to go to Hebrews chapter 11 today. And this is verse 1. He sort of defines faith for us and gives us a good explanation. Now, faith is, and many of you, all of us, we have heard this, this very passage that I'm about to read to you. We've heard this talked about, preached on, but by the time we got to the end, it was more complicated than it really is supposed to be. See, the writer of Hebrews is trying to make it simple and understandable, and oftentimes we're like, okay, it can't be that simple. So we try to complicate things and we try to manipulate it. But let me just tell you what he says. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for. So we're introducing a new word, right? Hope. So sometimes we associate faith, hope, and love because those are kind of used in the New Testament together a little bit, though the greatest of these is love, as Jesus would say. But hope is another term that we can introduce here, and hope is simply this. Hope is wanting something to be with no guarantee. Wanting something to be with no guarantee. Meaning, I hope that this thing happens, but I don't really know, right? I mean, some of us really hoped Fresno State would win, you know, and then they did, so it came true, but there was no guarantee that that would happen, right? It's like that all over the place. You have hopes, right? You hope that they happen, but you don't know for sure. And that's how we live day to day. We have a lot of hopes, don't we? So hope is wanting something to be with no guarantee. So you hope, to raise good children. You hope maybe to get married or get a date, or you hope that you have a long-lasting career that's fulfilling to you. You hope to retire one day, but there are no guarantees for any of these things. I hope to wake up tomorrow. No guarantee, right? I hope to make it home today. No guarantee. We don't know, right, what the future holds for us. We don't know what's going on. So in the grand scheme of things, we got a lot of hopes, but we don't have a ton of guarantees. But faith happens when hope so becomes something else. Faith happens when hope so becomes confidence something will be so. When hope so becomes confidence that something will be so. So you have this different take, you turn hope into faith. So how does that happen? Well, what makes us confidence that hope so will be so? I mean, like if you, for a long time, maybe you say, I hope that I'm getting a raise. Well, how do you know that's going to happen? How do you know you'll get a raise? When your boss tells you you're getting a raise, right? You have someone in authority tell you this is what it's going to be. And you say, okay, now I can trust that. Hopefully you have a trustworthy boss. I can trust that. That's going to happen. So now I can go home and say, guess what? I hope I get it. No, you don't have to say, I hope I get a raise. You could say, hey, I got a raise. How do you know? My boss told me. So when somebody in authority reassures you that it's going to happen, then you can have faith. He says this, the writers of Hebrews says this, verse 1, now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. Assurance. So when we are assured something will happen, that's when our hope turns to faith. That's when our hope turns to faith. If we send you an invitation to dinner, hopefully that is an assurance that you are welcome and that we're going to have dinner together if you accept, right? But you're not just saying, I hope they send me not that any of you are saying, I hope Micah sends me an invitation. But I'm just using that as an example. Perhaps it is. If that's you, please tell me so that I know, so we can invite you over. But either way, faith is, now let's talk about faith. Faith is confidence God is and will do what he has promised, right? We often say, and I often say around here, that really what's really important is one of the questions that is most important in his life is, who is Jesus? What did he say he'll do? What has he done? What does he say he'll do? And how does that affect your life, right? So these are questions like, who is this person? What authority do they have? What have they done? And what do they say they're going to do? And that's when faith really comes alive, is when we look at the promises that we believe God has made. The writer of Hebrew says this again. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And in verse 2, this kind of faith, this kind of assurance, this kind of confidence is what the ancients were commended for. All right, we got to pause for a second. When the writer of Hebrews talks about the ancients, he then goes on to a long list of people, and this could be, for the audience he originally wrote this for, this would be immediately understandable. There would be a long list of names, these heroes of the faith that came before the writer of Hebrews. There would be all these names that come flooding to mind, right? And one of those is Abraham. Abraham was promised a lot. In fact, Abraham left his home, and he left his home not because someone kept wearing his clothes, not because he was annoyed with his family, but he left his homeland, he left his home because he was promised by God that he would have his own, and that he would become a great blessing for all nations. Not only that, but he would become a nation, that his offspring would become a nation. Now, that's a big promise. That's a promise God made to Abraham. So he did that. He believed that. God promised it. He followed through on it. It happened. So then you got another ancient. His name's Gideon. He's the original 300 guy. You remember that movie 300? Well, this guy actually took 300 people into battle. The numbers were crazy. It was 200 to 1. The odds were ridiculous. But God had promised deliverance. He promised victory over the opposing army. And so he took 300 people into battle against another vast army. And they won. So he didn't just hope that they would win, but he had assurance. He had confidence because of God's promise. Because he had a personal connection with God, and God told him, you will have victory. Then we talk about people like Moses, who left Egypt kind of wanted, right? He left, he went to be a shepherd in the fields somewhere, and then God came to him and called him and said, you know what, you need to go back, because I'm going to deliver my people from slavery out of Egypt. Now, he didn't go back saying, well, I hope this happens. He goes back with assurance and confidence because God had said this will happen. And God also spoke to him through a burning bush that didn't seem to be really burning, but it wasn't consumed, but it was burning, and it was talking to him. So there's some pretty spectacular conversation happening around here, and I think that if that happened, I might just believe that as well. So he's got some confidence. He's seen some things, right? So he's not just going back saying, well, I think maybe, and I hope, but he's saying, no, I was told he will bring them out. And even through opposition, he continues to persevere. And God gives him instruction to keep going. And his people are eventually delivered. So the ancients believed a lot of things. They believed things that were specific for their time. They believed specific assignments that they had from God. And then they believed a global purpose. They believed that Abraham would be a blessing to all nations. They didn't know how that was going to happen, but they believed that promise. And all those ancients, right? We're talking like 2,000 years before Jesus when we're talking about Abraham. So the promise that is given to Abraham 4,000 something years ago now, right, has come to pass. See, the ancients were looking forward on it. They didn't know when it was going to happen. Jesus comes, fulfills that promise by his birth. By the way, that is the Christmas story, is that he has come to be a blessing through the line of Abraham, to be a blessing for all nations. How? Because he is God incarnate, because he shows God's heart for his people and all people of earth, that he is with us, he is not against us. So you have this whole thing where God kind of closes off this loop of promise, but it's taken 2,000 years from that first promise to when Jesus is born. And you see these ancients, they were before Jesus, so they were looking forward, saying, I believe that's going to happen. It just hasn't happened in my lifetime. So let's jump back a little bit, because I want to show you some of the things that, I want to show you what God said to Abraham. This is in Genesis chapter 12, verse 2 and 3. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. He promised it. In verse 3, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. All peoples. All peoples. Now that's a pretty big promise from one guy. What's pretty amazing is he's probably, many of you have heard his name, if not all of us have heard his name, and his name is pretty great now because we all know it. 4,000 years later, we all know his name, and we all know kind of a little bit about him. So you see this promise being fulfilled. That's pretty amazing. See, and what's also amazing is back then, nations didn't bless nations. Nations didn't come along and help each other. They were enemies. If anything, they came alongside each other against a common enemy, but they knew at any point they could turn on one another. They were not blessing one another. They came to destroy, and they came to take over and pillage and take the wealth of the surrounding nations. So one nation, the idea of one nation blessing other nations was not a concept in this time frame. Yet God promises that will happen through Abraham and the nation that he creates out of his lineage. We'll jump back to Hebrews 11 now, verse 13. All these people, all these ancients, were still living by faith when they died. Like I said, they had not seen the fulfillment of the promise. They were still it was in front of them. It was not fulfilled in their lifetime. So they died with that expectation still in the future. They died before God made his big promise come to life in Jesus. Verse 13, they did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. Meaning, I believe it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen, but I'm not going to see it. That's what is going on here. See, in the New Testament and the Old Testament, the people there, they didn't assume they could faith God into anything. And sometimes contemporaries, we feel like we can faith God into something. Like if we just have enough belief that he can do something, it'll happen. Like if we just say, God, I believe you will, I believe you will, I believe you will, that, well, he's got to come through because I believe, right? And that's kind of part of the construct that we've created for ourselves to keep ourselves nice and tidy and feeling good about ourselves and feeling good about our faith. However, that's not exactly how things work. That's manipulative and that's controlling, and we can't control God, right? I mean, if you feel like you can control God, I'd love to speak with you. I got a lot of questions for you of how that's worked out and why you're a multimillionaire and are on vacation all the time. But if that's not you, you're worth the rest of us. So I'm going to take us back to a verse in Luke 5. This is a quick story. This is just an example of what perfect faith looks like. See, perfect faith doesn't have to do anything with manipulating God or trying to make sure that he does what you believe he'll do. Faith is something bigger and it's better. Luke chapter 5, verse 12. A man with leprosy comes to Jesus, falls at his feet. A man with leprosy comes to Jesus, falls at his feet, and says this, Lord, if you are willing, not like, Lord, I believe you will, but Lord, if you are willing, if you are willing, you can make me clean. See, he's not saying, I believe you will, I believe you will, I believe you will, so you got to do it. He's saying, Lord, I know you have the power. I don't know if it's your will. But if you're willing, I know you can make me clean. Now think about the difference of that versus, Lord, you got to do it because I believe. Think about the difference there. And Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. And he says, I am willing. I am willing. Yep, I'm willing. There's humility that he's approaching Jesus with. There's a I don't know for sure, but I know you can, but I just don't know if you will. But I want to put it at your feet. And Jesus looks at him with compassion and says, I am willing. You're healed. He touches him. You're healed. And this drove all the people of his time frame, the people in his community, it drove them crazy because you don't touch leprosies. They're unclean. That messes with your religious cleanliness. That messes with everything that they knew. But the interesting thing about Jesus is he didn't catch people's germs. He healed their ailments. So it wasn't an issue for Jesus. This is like pre-understanding of germs. They didn't even know that stuff. They just thought he's unclean. You can't touch him. See, faith without promise is presumption. Like if you come to God and say, you will because I believe, you're presuming a promise that may or may not be there. So you got to back up and say, what is the promise of God here? What is the promise of God here? And sometimes we misapply some scriptures and we take it out of context and we say, yeah, that's for me, and we sort of steal those things from their context and story and believe that this is true for me or my family or my time frame, when they're not always, because we're taking it out of context. So you got to look at that, and you got to say, okay, what am I stealing, and what is true? What is the promise that God actually gives me? And people resist this definition of faith. They resist this because it keeps God in control. And we don't really want God to be in control, because that means I'm not in control, right? Like deep down, we want to be in control, right? We'd like to tell God what we need, how it's supposed to be, and how to make everything perfect. That's what we want, right? But real faith leaves God in the driver's seat, leaves God in control. We can't manipulate him. We can't force his hand. He makes the decision, right? And when God doesn't come through for that thing that we've desperately prayed for, it can destroy our faith because we believed and we believed and we believed and we trusted and we thought. But maybe he didn't make that promise that we were so desperately believing. And we lose faith because we were believing a promise that he never made. And here's why this is a big deal. Because a generation and a couple generations are abandoning faith because the church has signed God's name to promises he never made. Right? Accidentally, not even on purpose, just misapplying and taking things out of context and saying this is for you. We have misapplied and we have misguided people into thinking all of the Bible is equal in its application to everybody. And that's not quite how it is. Now, Jesus' death and resurrection equally applicable to every single person. Every single person. But we can't simply take out one verse from the Old Testament and say, oh, that is exactly what I need and that is the promise I need from God. We can't just claim those promises for us personally. He's talking to a specific person in a specific time to accomplish a specific goal to get us to Jesus. Our promise is Jesus. That is our promise. And that is what we need to cling to, fixing our eyes on Jesus. And if you grew up with a vending machine kind of understanding of God, that you just punch in the right numbers and put in the right amount of coins, that something's going to pop out that you wanted, you're going to lose that faith, and you should. Because that's not real faith. You should lose that faith. God is not a vending machine. He doesn't just provide what we desire. when we desire it. Sometimes he never provides what we desire because it's not good for us. And you may be, well, that's true because I prayed fervently, for the, I wanted to date this person or marry this person, and I am so glad looking back that did not work because I did not know all the details of that situation, that person, what they would turn out to be. So God has a bigger picture of things. That's why we can trust him with these things, because he knows more than us, even though we think we know everything, right? He knows more than us. He knows what's best. So a generation of people have been losing faith because the church has signed over, said that he had promised something that he did not, in fact, promise. God never promised many of those things. God didn't demonstrate his love or concern for you by promising you nothing bad would happen to you. That you would never have any illness, or that there was a perfect, flawless book you could follow to the T and everything would be perfect. He never promised those things. God promised this. God's promise is more full of wonder than any of those things. It's the most wonderful thing. And the Apostle Paul sums it up and writes it really well in Romans chapter 5. And he says this: but God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's the promise. Christ died for us. That's the promise that we can hold on to. That is the most important promise. And he rose from the dead. He conquered that death. And I think that's really, really interesting because it settles the trustworthiness of God. And God's trustworthiness was, all the questions around that was completely settled at the cross. And the cross proved his trustworthiness. He went to death for us. He went beyond the grave for us. He rose again to give us hope. That is what we put our hope in, right? That is what we put our faith in. He has assured us that we are saved by grace through the cross and resurrection, right? So those are the promises we need to hold on to very tightly. You cannot misapply those. Those are universal. Those are for all of us who would believe in him and believe that he did that. Those are for all of us. Let me say that again and emphasize it in a little different way. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And like we've been saying, God came to our side of the window pane. God came to our side of our lens to prove that he is on our side, that he is for us. And at the cross, wonder if you wonder if you can have a relationship with God and wonder why certain things happen, became a wonder of his glorious love. Became a wonder of his love. That's the gospel. And while the ancients looked forward to what God was going to do to bless everyone in the world, we get to look back. We get to look back and say, he did it. He did it. And we get to bring that message to more and more people in your everyday context. And we get to live a life of graciousness and love towards others because of that. See, we're invited to fix our eyes on Jesus. You're invited to fix your eyes on Jesus, especially in this season. I really want to focus your eyes on Jesus. See, he is the fulfillment of God's promise to the world and to you. God came to our side to demonstrate he is on our side. You don't have to wonder where you stand with him. He stands with you. Now, let me just take a hard left turn right here, okay? In case you were getting bored, take a hard left turn. Did you know that while we're sitting here talking about this, your body has, the cells in your body, about 2.8 billion have died while we're sitting here. And what's really equally as fascinating is that while we're sitting here, about the same amount of healthy cells have replicated themselves to replace those with no effort on your part, with no understanding of that, with no trying to do it. You didn't sit here and go, oh, please replicate. There was none of that. It just happened. Now, doesn't that just make you wonder? Like if your body can do that, if you were designed to do that, if your body can just like replicate the good cells and destroy bad ones, and I know there's certain things that doesn't always happen correctly, right? But just think about the amazingness of that. I mean, 2.8 billion cells. That's amazing to me, with no conscious effort. And that should fill you with all kinds of wonder. And you wonder maybe what else God did that was so amazing that we haven't even discovered. So what do you wonder? With all we don't know, 2,000 years ago, light broke through in the darkest of times. In the times where God had been silent for hundreds of years, hadn't spoken to anybody personally. And people were still looking forward to that promise from Abraham. They were still holding on to it. Hundreds of years later, God broke into the dark in a little town called Bethlehem and became one of us. Just think about the wonder of that. So what do you wonder? He showed up on our side to demonstrate he was for us. He is on our side. John wrote this. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. John wrote this. John chapter 1, verse 4. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Hadn't then, it hasn't now. So if you wondered, and then maybe you wandered from your faith, here's one more thing to ponder. There will always be things you will wonder about, because you can't know everything. But God's love for you should not be one of them. You can know where you stand with God, and you can know how he feels about you. He is for you, and he loves you. He wants a personal relationship with you. Nothing can take that away. And if you'll take your eyes off of people who failed you, arguments against God, all these peripheral things, and you fix your eyes on Jesus and what he has done for you. Now, you don't try to manipulate him and make him into some vending machine, but you say, you present to him, I have this going on. If you're willing, this can happen. That is a more perfect faith than one that says, I believe you'll do it, I believe you'll do it, I believe you do it. Now you got to do it. We're not fishing to catch him. He's caught us. We're not God. He is. He's sovereign, right? So we need to understand that God is God, and we are not, but he has proved that he is for us. And we can find rest in that. Fix your eyes on Jesus and the wonder of his love this Christmas. We got one more week, then it's Christmas, and you're going to be celebrating, and before you know it, there's going to be wrapping paper everywhere. Some of you, that'll be before Christmas because you got the little pieces left over, and some of you, it's going to be after because the kids will be so excited. You'll be cleaning it all up, right? Or the dogs will be ripping it up, or the cats will be, you'll finally let it go at it with the tree or whatever it is. But in all that chaos, just remember, Christ is Lord. He has come in the form of a baby in a time when it was so dark. No matter how dark your life looks right now, it was darker then, I promise you. But he has proved he is on our side. And you don't have to wonder where you stand with him. And you don't have to wander from faith in him, because faith is not a vending machine and it's not magic. It's assurance and belief that he is who he says he is, and he will do what he says he will do. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for just giving us all kinds of things to wonder about. All kinds of scientific things, all kinds of mathematical things, all kinds of interesting facts about life and how it works and the universe and God. It's just vast, and we can't wrap our mind all around it. But just as we can't wrap our mind all around the creation that you've made, we definitely can't wrap our mind all around you. And God, I wouldn't want it any other way, because you are not a figment of my imagination or my creativity. You are bigger than any of us, God. And we just want to trust you with your perspective and your sovereignty to do what is right in your eyes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you guys for being here. Next week, bring a friend. We'll be in the auditorium. God bless you. See you then.